Hey everybody, another night video. Been packing all day. I'm kind of exhausted, so we'll see how this goes. But there's a bunch of things I wanted to talk about tonight, actually, and a lot of them are inspired by some things you guys have been commenting on in your letters. Um, and look, I have festivity. Look, lights. My daughter brought some lovely flowers. I put them right there so I could have them in the background. She's asleep now, so she doesn't even get to see it. Anyway, I hope you guys are all doing good. Doing well. See, look, English. Um, anyway, so somebody brought up the fact, I don't know why I just found this image. I try to find like a silly image to put up in the beginning here. This image struck me as interesting, though, masked Shakespeare. There's this question that comes up often. About every time I teach Shakespeare, somebody raises it in class or something. The question of the who wrote Shakespeare? Was it Shakespeare or was it somebody else? And frankly, I have absolutely no idea why people are so fascinated with this question. Um, I mean, there's about as much reason to doubt that William Shakespeare wrote the plays of William Shakespeare than there is to doubt that any author ever wrote the things that are attributed to them. Um, be free to be skeptical and critical of attributions, surely. But frankly, I've never had a case presented to me that really makes me want to doubt the identity of the author of the plays and sonnets and poems attributed to a man named William Shakespeare. At least nothing stronger than any doubt that could be levied against Christopher Marlowe or John Ford or John Webster or Ben Jonson or Thomas Middleton or any of the William Shakespeare's contemporaries and competitors. I don't know. There's just not a lot to it. I mean, some arguments are so strange I don't even know what to do with. Like, I've heard the argument that if Shakespeare was so great and the king knew it, which is suggested by the fact that the king kind of employed Shakespeare's troupe as the king's men, that is King James I, then why wasn't Shakespeare hired for the translation project of the King James Bible? Well, if you think about that for just 10 seconds, you might have an answer. I'm not saying this is definitive answer to this question or that the question needs a definitive answer. He was a playwright. He was not a theologian, and he was not fluent in Latin or Greek or Hebrew like every single other member of the learned men that were assembled to translate the Bible. So no other playwright was called to serve on the committee of translation either. So I don't know, these sorts of what ifs and why nots. I don't really care for them, but I mean, it's kind of almost interesting to stand back and look at the field. Like so many people have their little have their almost cliquish like kind of clans of heroes to attribute the works of Shakespeare to. Francis Bacon, author of sort of scientific and philosophical works and these famous essays, he often is attributed or brought up as a possible author. Christopher Marlowe, who was a competitor of Shakespeare and allegedly died in a sort of bar fight and was maybe even employed by Elizabeth I's spy master Francis Walsingham to do some such things, and who was almost certainly a homosexual. He often is given the attribution. I've seen people suppose that Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, somehow wrote the plays of Shakespeare. There's Mary Sidney, which is interesting because it's a woman, and if I'm not mistaken, she's Jewish, so that would be all kinds of cool. It would be cool, sure. It'd be cool if any of the plays, if there was some sort of intrigue, but frankly, I'm not seeing it. Whatever, though, go do your reading and don't listen to me if you don't want to. I guess that sort of goes as the case in any situation. Anyway, so much for this picture. There's a lot of other things I wanted to talk about, too. Somebody, now damn it, I can't remember who said it, but somebody was kind of confessing in a letter that they have what I've referred to recently as a phantasma, wait, a fantasia, I think that's it. The question was, how do you read, or the discussion was, how do you read Shakespeare? And this person, one of you, I think, was saying, well, I don't really see it happening in my head. I'll have probably lots more to say about that in the letter I'm going to write. The question is a really good question for especially a performative art form like the plays. The plays of William Shakespeare are really, as maybe any text, only half the thing. I mean, you could take them as the whole thing, as if they were a poem on the page, and then the entire interaction is between you and your mind, and what is being realized in the interaction between the text and your mind, and your imagination, say, or the other sort of, uh, response in yourself to the text. But a play script, you could say, some people really insist on this, it has to be performed. Um, so, yeah, in other words, there's much missing from the text, and it's always worth thinking about that. I think it's one of the many things worth thinking about when you're reading Shakespeare. This is just like computer software waiting for its running, waiting for running in the form of action, in form of speech. Every word that here has a silence around it and before it, and an unwritten and unscripted tone and presentation, and then a whole set of human actions and the facial expressions. All of this is missing in the text. But this is where our imagination can come in, even if we don't have a theatrical or a film adaptation. When you read Shakespeare, feel free to be the director and the producer of the play in your mind if you want to. How would you? This is where it becomes good question for interpretation. How would you stage these particular lines, this particular play, this particular scene? Who would you have on the stage? Who wouldn't you have on the stage? Would you set it where it's supposed to be set? And that's a quizzical question for the Taming of the Shrew, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Or would you set it somewhere else, as many adaptations sometimes do, like, staging Romeo and Juliet in 1950s New York, West Side Story, sort of, right? So these are questions that can lead to kind of interpretive modes. How would you stage it? How would you say it? How would you perform it? These are good questions to have at any given time. But just to give a little extra and maybe insight to those questions, I thought we'd take just a second before I talk about Taming of the Shrew, to talk about the actual visual place, the actual place in which these plays were performed. Now it's funny because we're reading the Taming of the Shrew, and Taming of the Shrew was not performed at either of the places that I've put into these images. It was actually first performed in something called, I wrote it down somewhere, but now I'm not going to. There it is, Newington Butts Theater, of which we have no visual. Oops, get that out of here. No visual images or descriptions to go on. So I thought we could start by zooming in from this. This is called A Long View of London. It's from 1642, which is a good 20-some years after Shakespeare died, but it's got some sort of relevant items here. Let's zoom in, and from this long view of London, right over here, and we will see a place you've probably heard of before, the Globe. So we're on Southwark, that is the south side of the Thames, looking across to the larger area of the city, at this time larger over on the other side. And I think the Globe qualifies as Bankside. Anyway, so here it is, the famous Globe. So one thing about Shakespeare that hasn't really come up in how we're talking about him, we've talked about him as this canonical centerpiece of English literature, maybe even world literature to some extent, how he's been sort of fabricated as this monolith, this sort of extreme genius, pinnacle of humanity and linguistic art, etc., etc. You know what he was, though? Here, well, this will give you a little bit of an idea about. Well, it'll bring up something I want to kind of mention. And well, here's the Globe, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Let's just walk about, I don't know, a couple hundred paces further south here. Look at this, bigger than the Globe, but kind of similar to the Globe building here. Another theatrical sort of space, another arena. But if you look carefully on the side, you can see some lettering, which I'm not sure how clear it's going to come through, so I'll read it for you. It says, bear baiting. Yes, folks, this is the famous London bear baiting arena. Bear baiting, you ask? What's bear baiting? Well, it's about as awful as you could imagine it to be. You get a bear, and you get some other animals, usually hungry dogs, and you sick them on each other in a stadium, and people can bet on who's going to kill who first. And then you watch the animals tear each other apart. Bear baiting. Yeah, Yay. You know, any given Sunday, get to go watch your bear baiting. So this hideous violence was much enjoyed just a few hundred yards away from where what we consider to be the pinnacle of literature was enjoyed. Um, which kind of goes to show what Shakespeare was, if nothing else, in his time, and as a citizen in London, he was an entertainer. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to create immortal lines that would sort of sing down the centuries and speak to every new generation in an ever richer way? Or was he trying to sell tickets? Both? Why not? Why not both? I'm a both and kind of guy. But nonetheless, it's not an either or in which entertainment loses. There's many other competitors for the sort of extra capital on hand in the London middle class. We'll talk about some in a minute. But Shakespeare wanted them to come to the Globe. He was producing entertainment. It's never something to forget. It's high in the sort of intentions, I think, that are behind the play, and it's one that's not worth sweeping away so we can be all academic and intellectual and dissect. You know, a comedy needs to get laughs. A tragedy needs to get tears and whatever that flush of emotion is that Aristotle called catharsis, but which might be something completely different that you get from tragedies and from histories. He needed people to flood into that theater. What did that theater look like? I thought I had another slide in here. Where'd it go? Phooey. Well, there might be a random slide coming up. I wanted to show you a picture of a guy named Henry Carey. Where is that guy? Did I not put him in here? What a bummer. Oh well. So Shakespeare at the time of the performance of the Taming of the Shrew was part of the Lord Chamberlain's man. The Lord Chamberlain at the time was a guy named Henry Carey. Lord Chamberlain's basically the head of the household of the royalty, the royal house. And he was a rich guy, and he funded a theater company. So already in Shakespeare's time, theater was becoming a very aristocratic undertaking, where before it may have been more temporary, more contingent, and sporadic. Theater was usually performed in the in the 14th and 15th century, and early centuries of English life, in stages that would just be erected for the purpose and then taken back down. The Globe was a permanent theater, and this was relatively new in London, in the London city. There was I think the first theater in London that was permanent was just called The Theater, and I'm pretty sure some of Shakespeare's plays were performed there. Now I can't quite remember, but the Globe was created, actually, was built out of boards from another theater that the company sort of took down. There's a whole interesting story about this that I won't get into, and then brought and rebuilt into this Globe, which is sort of reconstructed here in this time. This would be the first Globe. The thing actually burned down in 1613. Shakespeare was 3 years away from death at that point, but it was rebuilt the year later in 1614. And then Shakespeare died in 1616, and then another 25 years later, 76 years, in 1642, the Puritans, who you might have heard some tell of, Puritans were in control of London in the onset of the English Civil War, well, the first one, and they closed the thing down because, you know, it was part of this scandalous prurient. It served the prurient interest, as our censorship likes to, say about things. So yeah, the Puritans shut it down, and then 2 years later they had it deconstructed. Jerks. Anyway, so so this is a reconstruction or a drawing of the first Globe. So there's a new Globe. And there it is. This is in London today. Maybe you've been there or seen it or heard of it. There is a new Globe. This is not the old Globe. This is like several decades old, but it was reconstructed about as well as I guess one could. And it has lots of interesting period features. However, this picture shows something that isn't one of them. There's something very wrong with this picture. Anyone have any guesses? I'm not hearing anything. It's performed, there's a play being performed at night, and there are big electric floodlights lighting up the stage. So you'll notice that globe had an open roof. Well, that's because you didn't want to set too many things on fire that you didn't have to. Um, so the original globe was open so that there could be daylight within, and plays were usually, if not always, performed during the day to capitalize on that light. So this maybe is a little more apropos, although it looks like there's some sort of hologram of the moon over here. I'm not sure what that's all about. There's just various scenes. Ooh, what a crappy picture. What is that, like 10K, 10KB? Anyway, you can dolly up the stage a little bit. You can get all kinds of cool, um, you know, uh, tapestries and stuff flying overhead to get various effects. This is a pretty minimalist setup down there, but you get the idea. It's a pretty big space with an open floor that you stand in, hence the famous groundlings, and then you have several decks. The higher you go, basically, the higher your pay grade. Um, so that's the Globe. Globe was by far not, hardly the, I should say, the only theater or theatrical space in London. In fact, there were many. Every little red dot you see here wasn't necessarily a theater, although there are several. Here's the theater up here, and the Blackfriars and the Whitefriars. And then all these other places too had spaces where plays could be performed and were performed. So there's, per capita, it seems there's probably more theatrical spaces in this area of London than there are movie theaters in any given suburb in America. There's lots of opportunities to see plays circa 1600. So here we were down here, the Globe. Yeah, so there was another major stage in Shakespeare's career. It's right over here. It's called Blackfriars, also a Lord Chamberlain's project. So what's interesting about the Blackfriars is that it sort of violated that principle I said about avoiding closed spaces and fire. Um, it was an indoor space. So yeah, you would have to have lamps, fires lit around this, and chandeliers to light up the stage, but it was an indoor space. It was actually very recently been reconstructed in America in a place called Staunton, Virginia, where there's this American Shakespeare Society. They put on great stuff. They've recreated the Blackfriars stage, so you can go visit it. It's just up the road a little bit. So one thing that's interesting about the Blackfriars is that it was home to what were they called? It was a home to a child. I'm getting into another topic of interest for us, especially in Taming of the Shrew. It was the home of a child play group, a child troupe, apparently very popular at the time. So children were often involved in the London theatrical scene in several different roles. So in the children, what they call the Children of the Chapel Players, there was a whole troupe that would put on the same sorts of plays that were reading, not necessarily Shakespeare's plays, probably not ever. Well, not no, over his dead body, it seems. But they would perform a repertoire, and people ate it up. How old am I talking about here? Well, 8 to 12 seems to be about the range of these child actors. 8 to 12, yeah. And they'd play all the roles, men and women, boys and girls, would all be children. And apparently it was just one of the sort of favorite entertainment alternatives in London at the time that Shakespeare was competing with. So what does it have to compete with? He has all of the other famous and semi-famous playwrights of the time writing comedies and tragedies, etc. You've got bears and dogs murdering each other, and you've got little kids, little boys performing man plays or big boy plays. So what else did those little boys do? Well, here we come to a crucial aspect of Shakespeare's contemporary theater, worth keeping in mind, especially in this play, though seldom sort of obeyed today or seldom used today in theatrical productions. The fact that there were no female actors at all. No female actors at all. So all of those famous women in Shakespeare's plays, Cordelia, and Rosalind, just all of them, Miranda, Juliet, and Lady Macbeth, all male actors playing in drag, in female clothing, in female costume, those roles. And so, especially when it was a young woman, there's another here. So, what's the problem with this picture? Well, the age of Juliet. This is the famous Palmer scene and the dance where Romeo meets Juliet, performed relatively recently in an all-male, with an all-male cast. So sort of what's wrong with this picture, not that there's anything wrong with this, they can perform it however they want, but if we were going to say this is trying to be historically accurate, well, Juliet is way too old. So those same 8 to 12 child actors would often be the choice for the female leads of Shakespeare's comedies and some tragedies. So yeah, I doubt they would put on a romantic comedy on any modern stage in which the female lead is an 8 to 12-year-old boy. That would raise all kinds of interesting questions. Not so interesting. These questions we should just cut it off here. So yeah, again though, they've tried to do this recently, but yeah, we have a different context now, and that's one of the things that makes it so interesting though, is that now, with all of the current gender questions, performing a Shakespeare play with an all single gender cast has a very different message from the just plain normality of it that Shakespeare would have written with with that in mind, or written for, that would have informed, I guess, his intention, if we care about his intention. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, especially because as you probably noticed, if you've started to read The Taming of the Shrew, The Taming of the Shrew is an interesting play for many reasons. And it's a wonderful, hilarious, and famous play, but it's got this interesting frame thing going on, right? So it's called, I'm not sure actually what it's called in your text, but I think it's marked as the induction, which is something that the poet Alexander Pope put into his edition of Shakespeare. He called those two sort of opening scenes with Sly and the Lord who's messing with Sly. They called it inductions. Excuse me. But they're really basically a frame. And the question is, so just to recap what you might have already read, there's this kind of crappy barfly named Sly, and this Lord comes in. And because he's a Lord and he seems to have sort of infinite resources, all of this is worth kind of thinking about. He decides, well, let's do this like elaborate gaslighting plot against this poor drunk guy. So when he wakes up, we're going to make him think he's a lord, and we're going to surround him in all the lordly trappings, including a wife, which I'll get to in a minute. But so that whole thing frames, they perform a play for this Lord Sly, and that play is The Taming of the Shrew. So The Taming of the Shrew is actually a play being performed inside the frame of Sly and the Lord's trick on Sly. So yeah, I always find that so fascinating. How would one perform this? Do you have Sly off to the side of the stage for the entire performance of Petruccio and Kate, etc.? Is he just sitting there like watching it? Because every once in a while he chimes in. So there's, again, how would you perform this? What would you put on the stage at any given time? Anyway, so sort of famously here, the Lord brings in this boy, this page, Bartholomew, and he says, dress up like a woman and be the wife. Be like the madam to this Lord Sly that we're gaslighting here. And so they dolly up the little boy, and he has to act like the wife. And there's all these sort of really hard to stomach scenes that probably were really funny at the time, where like Sly is like trying to get the little boy dressed as a woman into bed, and it's sort of hilarious. But one of the things that makes it hilarious, maybe in the mind of that original audience, is that it is bringing to the surface the truth of all the female characters on any play in Elizabethan theater. They're boys in drag. So this is just sort of, and maybe the one play in which a female character played by a boy is like visible in the play, at least just for sort of a moment before we kind of enter incept into yet another sort of play being performed within that play. And you have to wonder, since we're sort of burying one whole represented narrative inside of another kind of world, in fact, we're burying an Italian world, which is often where Shakespeare comedies take place, as a play inside of a represented English world. And one cool final thing I'll say about that is that some of the people that Sly talks about knowing in real life, when he's sort of trying to figure out who he is, like Christopher Sly, or excuse me, Burton Heath, his dad's name I can't remember, these names refer to possibly real life personages. In fact, some of them are definitely real life people who lived in Stratford upon Avon, which was Shakespeare's hometown. And there again, you're like, but Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. Okay. Anyway, but Shakespeare had a hometown, and it was Stratford upon Avon. And some of the characters that Sly mentions in his sort of self-defense or self-questioning are real historical personages from Stratford upon Avon. So in a way, that little frame narrative gets about as close to Shakespeare autobiography as we get. Um, and then the child actor brings sort of the truth of the theatrical circumstances closer to the surface um, than than they are almost anywhere else. Like you might have heard of this phrase that Samuel Taylor Coleridge comes up: the conscious suspension of disbelief, or willing suspension of disbelief. I have to go check my quotes. It's what you have to bring to a theater in order to enjoy it, or at least to enjoy it in one way, so that you're not just seeing a stage on which people are playing roles, but you allow yourself to suspend your disbelief in what they say they're doing and go with it, and see, in this case, Luciano and Gremio and Grumio and Tranio, etc., as real people in actual Italy. So the induction of this play, interestingly, forces you to do hardly any suspension of disbelief at all. It's like a contemporary, near London reality where the women are played by boys, just as you would believe, or you would see on a stage if you were not suspending your disbelief. So along with Sly, etc., well, pretty much just with Sly, we suspend our disbelief when we get to this Act 1 into the play that we've all kind of been prepared to call The Taming of the Shrew. What I wanted to do, if I have time, I know I talk a lot in these things. I really don't know how much time I've been jabbering already. But I know some of you have had trouble with Shakespeare's English. You've been talking about that a little bit. Yeah, my God, it's so hard. And not only is it hard because it's a 400-year-old kind of English, which works in many very different ways from our own modern American English, dialects of English, but it also is very difficult in its own right. It's poetic, and Shakespeare was renowned for being complex, even in his own time, and not just like in his metaphors and stuff. I mean, just like in how he constructed English. So I'm going to try, and we'll see how this works. I just have a couple scenes picked out. I thought maybe I would just read through it and make sure everything is sort of clear in it. So one being the first scene of the play where Luciano is talking, excuse me, Lucentio. It's so weird. There's a problem here too, which is that Shakespeare, either Shakespeare doesn't know or his characters don't know Italian very well. So anyway, Lucentio or Lucentio and Tranio, his sort of servant, arrive on the stage. So anyway, I'm just going to go through this, and I wish I had you guys like available to ask questions rather than me just talk about it. But we'll see what I can get out of this. I'm not even sure these are the best lines. The next scene is even worse. So let's see. Tranio, since for the great desire I had to see fair Padua, nursery of arts, I am arrived, for faith, fruitful Lombardy, the pleasant garden of great Italy, and by my father's love and leave am armed with his good will and thy good company. Yeah, so, since for the great desire I had to see fair Padua, so the since here has to sort of wait until the I am arrived, and it seems to me more like a because. I had a great desire to see Padua, I am arrived in Lombardy. Nursery of Arts, well, there's this edition, by the way, and I'm going to have to upload some PDFs for you guys, because I don't think your edition has much in the way of notes, and sometimes these can be a burden, sometimes they can be very helpful. But this down here, obviously, is helpful, famous for its university, so that's why it's a nursery of arts. Fruitful Lombardy, perhaps because it produces lots of grains, that making it the pleasant garden of great Italy. By my father's love and leave, there's a little Shakespearean wordplay, that sort of thing he loves, love and leave, with their little twitch of a vowel connects but also disjoints two very similar words that we might not have associated. And it's just in passing. With my father's love and leave am armed with his good will and thy good company. So in other words, his father loves him, that's why he sent him, and he also let him go, his leave. Anyway, my trusty servant, well approved in all, Approved maybe meant more approved, as in he's approven in honesty and his service, etc. Well approved in all. Here, let us breathe and happily institute a course of learning and ingenious studies. So here's one thing where English across centuries can actually have what you call in language learning false friends. So ingenious might make you think they're really smart studies. No, not really. Ingenious is kind of, if you know any Latin, bring it to bear, because here you can see that the gen is talking about something that's born into a thing, and the in, well, the in is in. So it's like studies that are born into the place or natural to the place. The type of, in other words, a course of learning and ingenious studies, the type of studies that are natural to this this place and my circumstances in it. Not super smart studies. In fact, not really at all super smart studies. English meanings have drifted over the centuries. So watch out for false friends kind of getting you into a meaning, because that's why these editions are sometimes very handy. Piece of renown for grave citizens, that is probably serious-minded citizens, gave me my being and my father first. A merchant, that is my father, a merchant of great traffic or well-traveled through the world. Vincentio, or Vincentio, come of the Bentivogli. Vincento's son, brought up in Florence, it shall become to serve all hopes conceived, to deck his fortune with his virtuous deeds. So now he's talking about himself. Vincento's son, brought up in Florence, it will become who? It will become him. It will become me, to serve all my father's hopes. That is, all the hopes my father has conceived for me. It shall all condensed into, it shall become to serve all hopes conceived. To deck his fortune with his virtuous deeds. Well, that's a little easier to see, to sort of heap or ornament his riches with good report, virtuous deeds. And therefore, Tranio, for the time I study virtue, and that part of philosophy will I apply that treats of happiness. So what part of philosophy is it that treats of happiness that he is going to apply? Ethics. Because Aristotle, who I think was mentioned in that footnote about Padua, well, Aristotle's ethics is devoted to happiness. That's what ethics is for Aristotle. What is the way to be most happy? And of course it is to be a philosopher, but that's because you asked a philosopher. By virtue specially to be achieved. Okay, will I apply that treats of happiness? By virtue specially to be achieved. So this is a tricky little piece of syntax here. Happiness, you gotta, this is perfectly normal Elizabethan syntax, English syntax of the era, just maybe a little bit of a twist to get it into the verse, but it seems awfully wonky to us. So unpacking it, it almost looks like we have to Rubik's Cube the thing, but that wouldn't have been necessary really in the mind of, say, the original hearer. And if you read this stuff way too much, like, I guess I have, it doesn't really cause a hitch. But it's just a matter of sort of letting yourself be a little more flexible, because Elizabethan English is much more flexible than modern English in word order. So, okay, by virtue, okay, I will apply that part of virtue that treats of happiness to be achieved. So we might say achieving happiness, especially by virtue, which can contort within the realm of proper syntax at Shakespeare's English, happiness, and then all of this is modifying happiness by virtue specially to be achieved. Anyway, he goes on, tell me thy mind, for I have Pisa left, I have left Pisa. So this is a very Germanic thing to do if you have a helping auxiliary verb like have and then a past participle like left. German to this day requires that past participle be tossed to the end of the sentence. So older English could have a similar flexibility more as an option. For I have left Pisa, but you can say I have Pisa left, and am to Padua come. There it is again, helping verb am, and come, thrown over to the other side of the clause. I am come to Pisa, as he that leaves a shallow plash to plunge him in the deep, and with satiety seeks to quench his thirst. In other words, he's left Pisa, which was the shallows, the shallow plash, and he's dived headlong into the depths of Padua, where he can apparently get a full draught of quenching water to satisfy his interests. So tranio, in this sort of funny um, way that Shakespeare has with like other languages, he kind of mispronounces or misspeaks Italian, even though he's supposed to be Italian. Mi perdonato, which doesn't mean much. I guess you'd have to say perdonate in an older form of polite verb, or you could say me perdona, but perdonato doesn't quite mean what you would want this to mean. Anyway, pardon me, gentle master, my gentle master, I am in all affected as yourself, affected. Um, I wonder if there's a verb on this or a note on this. Probably like in the same opinion as you are. Oh, inclined. There you go. I'm all affected as yourself. In other words, this place affects me in the same way that it affects you. I have the same affect. Glad that you thus continue your resolve to suck the sweets of sweet philosophy. Only, good master, while we do admire this virtue and this moral discipline, let's be no Stoics, nor no Stocks, I pray. So, Stoics is the sort of cold and middle path between joy and pain philosophy of like Seneca and Epictetus, or stocks like just lumber, basically. Let's not be boring philosophers here. Let's not so devote to Aristotle's checks as Ovid be an outcast, quite abjured. So syntactically, let's not devote ourselves so much to Aristotle's prohibitions, so that we um, so that Ovid be not outcast, that we quite throw out. So what this means, Ovid is famously a Roman poet who was famously amorous and erotic and playful. And he was often sort of paired against the more philosophical writings of like Greek and then the same Seneca I just mentioned. And now, so he sort of stands, in other words, for a learned audience like Shakespeare's, as a placeholder for like all of sort of erotic, amorous, joking fun. Anyway, bulk logic with acquaintance that you have. Now, actually, I don't even know exactly what that means. Bulk logic sounds like it means cut it, maybe mix it up with acquaintance that you have, and praise rhetoric in your common talk. Music and poesy used to quicken you. And quicken here means enliven you. So use music and poetry to keep your cheer. The mathematics and the metaphysics, fall to them as you find your stomach serves you. No profit grows. I think that's more or less self-explanatory. Only, interestingly, it just sort of throws mathematics and metaphysics out as sort of a noun box. And then it's the them catches back to that. So the mathematics and the metaphysics, fall to them as you find your stomach serves you, as your stomach demands, as you can stomach them, because they're hard. No profit grows where is no pleasure taken. So yeah, we would want a there to be in here, but older English doesn't require it. The where kind of has it. No profit grows there where there is no pleasure taken. It's not good to do all this stuff in misery. In brief, sir, study what you most affect. So here Tranio is being clever, and he's bringing around that thing he said about being affected like him. And now he's making it mean something like what is most pleasing to you. Study what you most affect, with sort of a jab at the ribs saying, like, let's go after some ladies too. Let's not be Aristotle's only, let's also be some Ovids around here. So, a lot going on there, and not some dicey syntax. None so dicey, though, and I hope I have time for this. Maybe I'll just do a few lines of this, and I really wish I could get some questions. I'll talk about the new Zoom time that we're going to start up next week in my announcement. Okay, anyway. So this is where Petruchio, let me get this out on my thing here too. Petruchio first meets Catherine, or Kate, or Katerina, as she's variously called in this play. So, in other words, where the suitor who is going to tame the shrew first meets the shrew. So let's see what happens. There's some interesting wordplay and stuff here, because they really have a good banter, a back and forth, one line to one line, and they sort of each holds their own against the other. Although in round one here, Petruchio seems to lose a little bit. We'll talk about that. Good morrow, Kate, says Petruchio, for that's your name, I hear. Well have you heard, but something hard of hearing, so she's already starting to play with them. Not too great, but heard becomes hard in the same way that love and leave traded places a little bit before, just to sort of take a shot at him, casual shot at this stranger who's calling her Kate. Notice too that he goes in for the thou with her, the thou form. And I mean, you might have heard about this, that our modern pronoun you was actually originally a plural, and it became in English's in Shakespeare's English, a polite version for people you don't really know or for people that are above you in station in society. And the thou was preserved for people that you presume to know, maybe a loved one. God was a thou. God's always a thou in languages that make this distinction, interestingly. Um, but it can also be used if you're talking to somebody who is new to you or in a station above you as a term of contempt. In other words, to thou somebody who you haven't earned the thou with can be seen as belittling. Okay, anyway. So here he's still in the you, but watch him switch. I think he switches here already. You lie in faith, for you are called plain Kate. So he's kind of diminishing her with this pet name, Bonnie Kate. Some manuscripts say Bony Kate. Look at that. And in fact, the original folio, that's what capital F means. This fancy stuff down here is like a secret code for nerds to tell you what the original editions had and to tell us where these modern editions sneakily change things. So Bonnie means fair, lovely, but bony, like big boned Kate. Maybe she's robust. I don't know. And sometimes Kate the Cursed. But Kate, the prettiest Kate in Christendom, Kate of Kate Hall, my super dainty Kate, for dainties are all Kates, and therefore Kate. Take this of me, Kate, of my consolation. He's really battering her with her own name. It's like this is how they train sociopaths to talk to people when they don't want, they use their names. Anyway, there's a little play here because a Kate was like a tasty treat. It's another older meaning of the word C-A-T-E usually, but Kate. So he's playing on this term Kate. Basically, a Kate is a dainty. That's why he's going on about this, for dainties are all Kates, and therefore Kate. Take this of me, Kate, of my consolation. Hearing thy mildness praised in every town, thy virtues spoke of. There's another place where you can wreck your high school English teacher's day if you want, by showing the past tense spoke instead of the past participle spoken. Yeah. Shakespeare treated grammar like his playground. And thy beauty sounded, yet not so deeply as to thee belongs. That is, your beauty hasn't been sounded. And sound in this sense, take the sounding, say, of the depth of water, right? So it's not, I haven't, the way I've heard your beauty spoken of, it hasn't gotten to the bottom of you yet. Not so deeply as to thee belongs. Myself am moved to woo thee for my wife. Moved in good time. Let him that moved you hither remove you hence. That's pretty obvious. Get out of here. I'll move you. Anyway, I knew you at the first. You were immovable. So if you know French, you know meuble, which is furniture. Basically, she's saying, you're just a piece of furniture. Get out of here. You look like nothing to me. You look like something I should sit on. Well, that'll come back in a minute. Why? What's immovable? Says Petruccio. A joint stool. So here, the joint stool is a not very great stool at that. The kind of stool you toss around to have somewhere to sit when you just need to like kneel and take a drink. Not a nice carpentry, a piece of carpentry, not a nice actual construct, not a piece of art. Thou hast hit it. Come, sit on me. See, now here starts the erotic play. Asses are made to bear, and so are you. So here's something, a lot of people like seeing ass in our modern double entendre, like the animal, the ass, jackass, and then, a butt. The butt wasn't really there yet, so be careful. Not everything that is a pun and funny to us is punny and funny to Shakespeare, although maybe you can just make it funny in any way you want. So a donkey, a jackass is made to bear, and so you are you. Women are made to bear, that is, give birth, and so are you, namely, so you need to marry somebody. No such jade as you, like a worn out donkey is a jade, a worn out jackass. As you, if me you mean, alas, good Kate, I would not burden thee. So here's like another double entendre because we're still in the family of bear, burr. I would not put a burden on you, right? But he's also saying like, I would not lay my whole weight on top of you, which gets you back into the bedroom banter. For knowing thee to be but young and light, too light for such a swain as you to catch, swain being just like a stinker boy. Too light now, it means fast. She's too fast for him, and yet as heavy as my weight should be. Now this is interesting too, because now we're getting into a sort of a discourse that Shakespeare loves to play with a little bit here and there, which is coins and counterfeit. So a coin that isn't the weight that it should be, doesn't have the value that it should have because coins were still linked to their precious metal of which they were made, and there was a whole sort of, oh, what do they call it? There's a term for this. There was a whole sort of industry of like a underground industry of shaving off the outsides of coins and then melting down the precious metals to make counterfeit coins. Anyway, it must be what she says here must be good because Petruccio seems to stumble. Should be, picking up on her should, and then what's he doing? Is he playing with the B? It's like a B-E-E-B? Buzz. Well, I don't know. This strikes me as kind of lame. But buzz is a word, you might have seen it in Hamlet. Buzz, buzz, when Polonius tries to report that the actors are there, and rumors already brought that news to Hamlet. It means like buzz, buzz. It's just gossip. So the gossip here being that she is as heavy as she claims to be. That is, you know, there's a rumor going around, Petruccio's implying, just with that one word buzz. There's a rumor going around that you're a real hard ass, Catherine. I don't believe it. Buzz, mere rumors. Well taken, and like a buzzard, right? So now she's switching it again, and now she's making it seem like he's like sniffing out a good dowry, like a good rich dowry, and vulturing around to pick it up. That's all she thinks he wants. It kind of is all he wants at this moment. Petruchio, oh, slow-winged turtle, shall a buzzard take thee? So now he's making her a cute little animal again. By the way, the Kate business up above was also playing on cat. So not a turtle like a little shelled reptile, but a turtle dove. Turtle is often used in brief for turtle dove. A cute little bird. Slow-winged turtle, shall a buzzard take thee? I for a turtle, as he takes a buzzard. I'm not even sure I even know exactly what that means. See, Shakespeare's hard. Anyway, I've been talking for probably a long time here. Let's see if there's any more. Oh, yeah, fine. We'll go through the tail bit because, well, now it gets kind of dirty, and I don't know how much you want to watch your English teacher go into Shakespeare's dirtier stuff. But come, come, you wasp. In faith, you are too angry. So now he switched his bee into a wasp. And like, I wonder how much, you know, Shakespearean English people, Londoners knew what the difference was between bees and wasps. They might have known just well. Anyway, so now she's a wasp. If I be waspus, best beware my sting. My remedy then is to pluck it out. So this makes all sense. I, if the fool could find it where it lies. So now we might be getting into a light erotic genitalia kind of thing going on here. Fools can't seem to find women's stings, she's implying. Who knows not where a wasp does wear his sting? In his tail. She falls for something in a minute, but anyway, in his tail. So, tail, by the way. Okay, so tail, notice it's his sting, so the wasp is now him, sort of. He's flipped the gender of the wasp, or flipped the attribution of the wasp. Now he's kind of the wasp, bringing his sting in to get her a little bit. Tail is, you know, we still have this as a sexual term, but it's always been a sexual term. Penis, by the way, is Latin for tail. It takes on its second meaning as a sort of euphemism almost, which is weirdly common of a lot of our sexual vocabulary. Yeah, so tail is almost always means the male genitalia. Now she tries to switch it on him in his tongue. Or in other words, yeah, okay, right. You come in here and you think you're gonna like, you know, pierce me with your tail, right? What you're really doing is just, you know, annoying me with your tongue. Shut up. Whose tongue? Yours, if you talk of tails, and so farewell. Now she flips the tail, right? So now, and at least doubles it. So now it's not just like that he's talking about tails, getting too kinky, I guess, with her, getting too direct. But now you're kind of you're lying to me. This whole thing's a tale. You're making it up. Get out of here. So farewell. And he says, what, with my tongue in your tail? Nay, come again, good Kate. I am a gentleman. So now I might not need to unpack this. But it took a little while for us to open up all of this tongue and tail bit, or this tail stuff, making the tail sort of simultaneously referring to female and male genitalia. It was the clitoris up above, then it's the penis. Sorry, folks, it's late. We got to talk about this. Anyway, and then she set him up, or thought she was closing him down with this tongue business, but he twisted on her again, and now we have really the as if, and this is Shakespeare going the long game, playing the long game for a line. All of that basically just set up this one dirty flip of meanings, but it's pretty contrived, but it also lands pretty good. So this, I guess, is what we're supposed to see as two people like Catherine and Petruchio flirting. Although what happens in the actual taming of the shrew goes far beyond anything this sort of playful. Um, at any rate, I don't know if that was much help. In a way, this was meant maybe to exhibit, if nothing else, that Shakespeare is hard, and almost every line gives you something that you have to think about twice and unwind and disentangle. And it also gives you some words that don't necessarily mean what we think they mean. It's hard. Yeah, just looking at the bare text of the comedy, sometimes it can be really good and really sort of enriching, but it also can just actually, just the plain text of Shakespeare is full of briars and brambles. So one thing I'll say finally to let you go. One of you was like, God, I have to confess, I went and I looked up a translation. No shame in looking at a translation of this. In fact, if you're having any trouble with this stuff such that you're not even really getting what's going on, totally fair. Feel no shame in going and looking up a modern English translation. But I ask this one thing, and that is that when you have up that modern English translation, keep the original up on the same page, or keep it in mind, or go back to it. Don't let the original English go away, because in there is Shakespeare's art. So anyway, I've blabbered, and I have a letter. I owe you guys a letter, which I hope to write tomorrow. But yeah, look out for that, and I'll see you guys around. See you on the flip. If I can ever get this thing to stop recording.